The spread of the occult, the rise of the occult, and in particular, the fact that the occult is no longer trying to hide, that they're coming out in public, in your face. It's very aggressive. They're like, this is really disturbing. The exorcists were saying, this is disturbing.
Welcome back to Mic'd Up, everyone. I'm your host, David Gordon. Today, I'm pleased to be speaking with Charles Frawny, author of the hit book Slaying Dragons 2, The Rise of the Occult. Charles, as you may know, boasts a Master's of Art in Theology from Christendom College and spent a decade as a Catholic theology teacher before dedicating himself to becoming a lay expert on spiritual warfare. He's written extensively on exorcism and New Age practices and has been at the vanguard of the growing movement to sortie against and quash the scourge of the occult. And indeed, the occult is a metastasizing threat in a godless Western society. Since man was made for transcendent things, as true religion wanes, false religion waxes in a futile attempt to fill the God-sized hole in man's heart. So it's no surprise that everywhere one looks in 21st century America, where less than half of the population belongs to a church or religious organization, one sees the septic indicia of alternative spiritualities. When it's not thinly veiled Satanism like in the puerile cacophonies of Lil Nas X, Sam Smith, and Ariana Grande, it's glamorization and normalization of the dark powers on TV through shows like Lucifer and the chilling adventures of Sabrina. Or perhaps more insidious, the constant, inescapable availability of so-called soccer mom sorcery like yoga, astrology, horoscopes, crystals, Reiki, Ouija boards, etc. The point is, gateways to the occult presently abound and are an attractive nuisance to those not well grounded in the faith. And it's a matter of pressing importance to identify and denounce such wickedness to prevent our brothers from falling into the snares of the devil. And that is our errand today. Charles, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's good to be here. Yeah, so this topic was on my mind at the end, because it's Slaying Dragons, the first book, which was very successful. The last chapter was dedicated to kind of basically the rise of the occult, but it covered a lot of other things similar to that. I can't remember the name of it right now, Consorting with Evil. So the rise of the occult was a little subsection in the final chapter of Slaying Dragons. So it was already on my mind and on the radar, but I had no intention when I started my work, Slaying Dragons Apostolate, as I call it, 2 years ago, full time, thanks be to God. This book was not yet on my radar. I was not planning on writing a book about the occult. But what was happening was I still had the seed in my mind from the final chapter, this interest that maybe I should look into it more. So once I started doing this full time, I was able to listen into some exorcists talking to priests, giving advice and counsel to people about what they see. And they were sounding the alarm with waving such a red flag that it caught my attention. Like, this is a real emergency in their mind, like the spread of the occult, the rise of the occult, and in particular, the fact that the occult is no longer trying to hide, that they're coming out in public, in your face. It's very aggressive. They're like, this is really disturbing. The exorcists were saying this is disturbing to them. I'm like, that gave me pause. I'm like, I need to look into this. And at the same time, I had people that I knew, people that I didn't know, Catholic families, contacting me, asking me to pray for them, or if I had advice because like their kid had gone into the occult, or their parent was in the occult, or they had friends who had gone into the occult. So it started to pop on my radar a lot. I'm like, this is a real issue. And so let me dedicate some time. And then God just opened all these doors, all these connections. Like, I interviewed close to 40 people. So exorcists, parish priests, former occultists, like all these doors opened up and all these connections happened. And I'm like, well, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. And it was so fascinating and disturbing, but also so practical, the information I was uncovering. Like, this is going to be my next book. And I pretty quickly realized this is what I should dedicate my first book, doing this full time, to this topic.
Sure. Well, okay. So what is the occult? We talk about it a lot, and it's a word that, rightly or wrongly, has a lot of stigma attached to it. What is it?
Yeah, so the occult, I thought about what do I call this book? What category do I throw all these things in? Because you have yoga, you have Reiki, you have Wicca, witchcraft, Satanism, Santeria, you have astrology, manifesting, all these different things. Like, what do I call it? I need a word for it. And the occult was always there as the word that I should use. So I thought about it for quite a while because it's kind of an ambiguous term. It's not an evil term in itself. It just means hidden. In the shadows, or hidden, I think is the best way to define it. It's a Latin word. But now it's become applied, it has often been applied, and especially nowadays is being applied to these esoteric rites and rituals that are invoking hidden powers and calling upon energies and demons specifically. Some of these are some forms of the occult call on demons, some do not. Some call on fairies or energy or just manipulate the will and make the person into gods. But all this, so occult means going into the darkness, going where it is forbidden, calling upon forbidden powers, dangerous powers, willingly taking risks, stepping into the unknown in order to acquire power and knowledge that you are not rightfully allowed to receive or allowed to access. So it involves a little bit of danger. And that's one of the things I talk about in my book, that occultists even know this. But you could look at like, manifesting and astrology, some of these new age practices where they think it's just safe and like, I'm not doing the occult. But when you talk to the people and when they really explain what they're doing, there's a common thread that even connects them to what Satanists are doing and witches are doing. It's all about divinizing yourself, turning yourself into a god, turning the human will into a force that can change things in the universe. And that's a deification. Like all the power that we give to God can reside in the human will if you really look at what these people are doing. So I think that's it's important that we name and describe what the word occult means, because a lot of people don't want to apply it to the New Age or to yoga or Reiki or other things. But if you look deeply at what's happening, they're all under that umbrella.
Sure. So it's fair to say that any New Age practices, anything where you're calling on energies, obviously open witchcraft, these things can all be placed under the penumbra of this catch-all term, occult?
Yeah, I would say it's safe to do that, and I think we need to do that. I think we need to it's a catechetical mechanism too. If we tell the culture, look, we have identified that you're manifesting your New Age practices, your whatever that you think is great and easy and safe and just white magic or whatever, we have determined that fits under the same category as we would put Satanism and witchcraft. And I think if we do that clearly, then the culture would be like, oh, wow, okay, well, let me make sure I really want to be doing these things, because the church regards it as very dangerous, even though I don't.
You're perhaps more optimistic and white-pilled about the culture than I am. I think perhaps it would yawn and shrug, but I hope that it's as you say, that they would take notice that the church condemns these things and kind of follow in the footsteps of the church. But okay, let me ask something. What fundamentally is wrong with the occult? We might have people tuning in right now that are like, what is wrong with wanting to have extra powers? What's wrong? What if I'm trying to use these powers or gain powers for myself to be used for, some good end? What do you say to them?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that came up with the issue of white magic and white witches, because one of the families, I talked to 6 families for this book, and one of them was saying, like, her son believes he's a white witch, and that's okay because he's a white witch. But in my research, very interestingly, I learned that Satanists clearly, like I think it was even Anton LaVey in his Satanic Bible, or maybe in some of his commentary, he said, basically, a witch is a witch is a witch. There's no such thing as white magic. The Satanists reject, and even a lot of witches, Wiccans, reject the idea of black and white magic because they reject the idea of good and evil. There's no distinction. You're tapping into the same energy, and they use this word energy. So that's another common thread in Satanism, witchcraft, Wicca, New Age, manifesting, there's this energy, even in yoga and Reiki, there's an energy you're tapping into. So it's the same unnamed. It will not reveal its name. And this is one thing an exorcist said about when he was talking to some nuns. This is another issue who were doing Reiki. And he said, what is the entity you're talking to? What is this energy? Give me the name. And the fact that it would hide its name, it would never reveal who it was very alarming to the exorcist. And he was trying to convey that alarm to these sisters, wayward sisters. This is not something Catholic nuns should be embracing. But so it's all evil because you're stepping outside of God's covenant, God's command. You're stepping into pride. You're stepping into willfulness, where you will be the God who determines what is good and evil. You will be the God who determines how your life will run, what your future will be. It's all about control. We're supposed to recognize that we are creatures, be humble, let God provide for us, divine providence, submit to his authority because he has the authority and we don't. So all forms of the occult, or stepping into that power, claiming that power, is an act against God. It's a Luciferian act, essentially. Satan wanted to control his whole world. He wanted to be separate from God, have all the power unto himself. So any kind of seizing of power, seizing of preternatural, supernatural power outside of God's permission, outside of his covenant, outside of his program, is a violation of the first commandment. It's a mortal sin, and it sets us up for dangers.
Okay, so what forms of occult practices do you think are most prevalent today?
Yeah, so one of the images I came up with when I was talking to a former New Ager, I gave all of them pseudonyms in my book. So Gabriel is his name, is this funnel.
I assumed that. I was looking through and I was like, these names are all very Christian. Oh, yeah. Pseudonyms.
That's right, pseudonyms, like great saints. Like I thought I would honor their conversions essentially by giving them pseudonyms of some of the greatest saints.
Sure, if they were real names today, they would be like Wyatt and Stone and stuff, whatever
and Northwest.
The pagan things people are naming their kids these days.
Yeah, and that's another sign of the spread of the occult, which we can talk about. But what was your question? I got thrown off.
Just what are the most prevalent forms of the occult that, in your research you've encountered? What would you say people are engaging most in of all the occult practices today?
Yeah, and that's where this image I was thinking about is the funnel. So this is a business model, where you throw out your free stuff and you get everybody's emails and they're on your list now, and then you try to promote the big things, the things they have to pay for, which is what your business is all about. So Satan uses a similar model. He throws out these easy, attractive, very appealing, kind of, these look safe, innocuous forms of the occult, like manifesting, yoga, even some forms of energy work like Reiki, because there's so much confusion. People think it's just, working with the energies of the world. Even Wicca is becoming much more widespread. But I would say manifesting, astrology, certain form. Not all yoga is bad. That's a big conversation. But a lot of forms of yoga are dangerous and bad, and it's very clear what's going on. But that's the outer ring, the outer rim, where the free stuff, the easy occult interests, manifesting, yoga, things like that, which will then draw people down. That's the issue. It draws people down into real occult practices like casting spells, witchcraft. Satanism is still more rare than witchcraft and Wicca when it comes to the statistics. We actually don't have good statistics on Satanism, but that would make sense. You couldn't believe them anyway because Satan is a liar. But Wiccans are a little more open. Actually, they appear on some kind of religion surveys. If you're a Wiccan, they'll admit to it. So manifesting, if you look on TikTok is a big culprit. From my research, there are certain things that I just had to stop researching because I just didn't have time. But TikTok, there are really destructive influences inside TikTok, both targeting youth, but promoting witchcraft, or promoting just body image, distorted images of your body and what the purpose of life is, even promoting sexual promiscuity. And there's also something where these people are getting these tics. There was this thing that has been studied all over the world by various pediatric and doctors and other kinds of doctors, of the influence of TikTok on the mind of the youth. It's this widespread thing, which I didn't get to finish my research on, but I have it in the book. But they would develop these tics that resembled Tourette's, but it was not Tourette's. but it was so widespread, and they blamed TikTok. But TikTok also promotes witchcraft. If you look at the hashtags they use, hashtag witch talk, they have billions of views for witch talk, but also manifesting, hashtag manifesting, whatever the hashtag is, billions and billions of views, like tens of billions of views. So this is where, witchcraft and Wicca are probably becoming much more prominent, just like manifesting, but manifesting also ties into some corrupt forms of Christianity, especially among a lot of Protestants, though not all Protestants. It's a corruption of the understanding, like where our Lord says, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move, and it will. Well, then they think that this is where manifesting skews that. They're like, if I believe enough, it will happen according to my belief. And that makes sense. If we have faith, God will do it. This is a big teaching. Faith is critical to God answering our prayers. If we really believe He'll do it, He will. But it's not a cause. So this is where the corruption is, where our faith, our believing is the cause of something to change in the world. It's very similar to manifesting, which is where I will it. Like I will into the universe a new job, and that new job will come to me because I'm manifesting it. And they have these little rituals, these silly little rituals that are promoted as well by these manifestation coaches. It's quite elaborate if you look into it.
Sure. What about like astrology? And you're hearing a lot about Reiki today, horoscopes, things of that nature. Are those kind of on the outs? At least astrology, it seems so 60s, 70s. Is that not a pathway for a lot of people today? And Reiki, are those things not drawing people into healing energies and whatnot?
Yeah, so astrology is a mixed bag. Sometimes it eluded me because there are some kind of benign forms where, like in the past, like St. Thomas Aquinas and the old medievals, they would debate whether the heavens, whether the planets and the stars actually did have some kind of influence on our bodies or on the earth. And we know the moon has an impact on the earth. So this is old form of astrology, which the Catholic intellectuals always debated. But modern astrology is a whole different animal. And that's what people need to understand. When kids are all into astrology, and this is the gateway to big occult practice. Like Gabriel, he started with astrology and quickly descended for like 2 years. And he was practically possessed. I think it was oppression, which was his case. But they're trying to forecast, or they're allowing the stars, the heavens, whatever it is, to control their future, to determine their future. And this is where it crosses a line into powers, into energy, into this manipulation over their lives that they can somehow work with. But Reiki is definitely problematic. And one frightening thing about Reiki is it is spreading. Like it's in so many hospitals. Nurses are being trained in it. Any kind of like massage therapy stuff, if people look into it, like you got to really check to see if they're doing energy work as well, because it's so prolific. And because most people are not Christian anymore, and the church's influence has really waned, people are seeking spirituality, and this idea of energy has become almost just widespread, commonly accepted, that there is a mysterious spiritual energy we can manipulate, and that's why it's appearing in all forms of the occult. But Reiki causes all kinds of spiritual dangers, from possession to oppression to home infestations. Like it's very similar to the impacts of a Ouija board, because you're summoning a spirit. You're working directly with a demon, essentially, and you are consenting to this person to essentially pray over you when they're doing energy work on you. It's a form of praying over you, and they have a demon attached to them.
I love how these people are like, silly Christian, your beliefs are irrational. Now let me stand and summon energy next to you to cure your cancer. It's like, right. You don't see the irony in this at all. But okay, so does this stuff actually work? I think in your book you talk about Reiki, and it's actually having some effect. I mean, why are people engaging in occult practices? Are they seeing the fruits of their, so-called labors?
That's the thing. Demons are angelic. They're fallen angels, but they have a power. They can manipulate us physically. They can mess with our minds. They can move things around in the world. They study. They're like a super intelligence agency, greater than anything we could conceive from a government. And they are watching the whole world all the time. So they can predict the future by a guess. They can't really predict the future, but they know what's happening across the world, and they can tell you. So they can give you knowledge. They can make it seem like you know the future, because they're really good at guessing what the future is. So this diabolical component is present in all of this. And remind me again of your question, because I just got on my train of thought crashed when we were talking about the demons.
Well, sure. I mean, these occult practices, people are trying to cast spells and summon messengers and fairies to do all kinds of errands and tasks for them, and asking entities for favors. Are they, getting what they ask for? Is this working? Is this efficacious? And I think in the case of Reiki, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that there are some results from that are, I think, statistically significant.
Yeah, so let's start with Reiki. But to answer the question, in case I lose my train of thought again, which happens because there's so much running through my mind, that is one of the draws, one of the addictions of the occult, is that demons will respond. They'll respond real fast as soon as you open the door, as soon as you commit that first mortal sin by breaking the first commandment, by consulting with demons, by whatever means, they will answer, and it becomes addictive, and you go straight down. But on the Reiki thing, so I think it's in it's The Occult Has Infiltrated the World, which I think is chapter 3. I talk about irregular, I think I call it irregular medical practices. So this superstition is really working its way into modern medicine. And a lot of Catholics are having difficulty discerning what is superstitious medicine, what is natural alternative medicine, because a lot of people don't trust modern medicine today, and that for good reason. So they go after these things that are kind of fringy, and some are good. They're based in nature and God's laws. Some are actually superstitious. So yoga and Reiki, I mentioned in my book, both have been studied by secular scientists and sociologists or whoever they are. And yoga, if you think about it, is stretching and breathing. So stretching and breathing is good. Everybody should stretch and breathe. Don't do yoga, but stretch and breathe. Our bodies are designed for activity, and oxygen is very helpful. It calms you down, clears the mind. So there are health benefits from stretching and breathing, and they've assigned those in these studies to yoga. So when they, in hospitals, and when doctors suggest, hey, do yoga to help your back, and people do yoga, they see positive benefits, and they put these in the studies. So there they see the cause. They see that there's a cause. There's a natural, rational link in their study. But then they look at Reiki, or Reiki, however you pronounce it, and they've seen the effect. They've done the studies. People do these energy works on people, and they've seen effects, pain relief, faster healings, things like that. But in their studies, they cannot find a cause. They cannot figure out what is happening. There's no natural cause present, which is bringing about these natural effects. And that should be really alarming, even to the scientists who did the studies. They said, maybe we should stop doing Reiki, because we don't know what this mysterious power is at work. And that could be the diabolical. So demons, we know, as I talk about in Slaying Dragons, can cause illnesses. They can afflict people physically. And they can also pretend to be miraculous by removing that illness or that affliction that they caused. And then like, whoa, so a demon could afflict somebody, theoretically, with a bad injury in the back all of a sudden. And then a Reiki master would come and do the energy work, and with that same demon, remove, all of a sudden, miraculously, through the energy work, remove that injury. And then it would seem like Reiki has a power, but it's really associating with a demon. So I don't know why people don't see a red flag when there's no natural cause, but mankind now is primed to believe superstition. Even doctors, even so-called rational secular people, they're inclined to believing superstition. And that's one of the dangers.
Sure. I mean, I think as I mentioned in the opening monologue, as false religion, it wanes, as true religion wanes, false religion waxes, because man is made for God. So it makes sense that today we're seeing this kind of stuff metastasize, and we're seeing the rise of the occult, because people know, contra Marx, contra this secularist, materialist ideology, which is foreign to man. Man recognizes that that's wrong, although, he's bought enough of the Enlightenment propaganda to maybe disregard the Christian notion of God. He's still searching for something transcendent. Man is still looking for something, because he knows it doesn't fit within the human intellect that the universe is just some mechanistic place where we're just a product of atoms moving in random patterns and whatnot. That doesn't fit. It doesn't square with human ideology, I would say.
Yeah, and that was actually Andrew, one of the former occultists I talked to. He said that primes people for the occult. What the world is teaching the youth now does not satisfy. It's atheistic driven. It's nihilistic driven. It's not satisfying their intellects, not satisfying their souls, not satisfying their search for truth. And it's setting them up, as it did for him, from his case at least, setting them up for preternatural interests, ghost hunting, tapping into mysterious things, and almost getting desperate for an answer, like really seeking. And this is one of the causes of why people go into the occult, is this unmet need for mysticism, and for truth. Like Andrew, he converted eventually to the faith because he was seeking truth. He sought it in the occult. He thought he would find it there. He didn't. He burned out on it, and he was guided eventually by an outreaching Catholic to the Catholic Church, where he found the truth he was always looking for. So it's this unsatisfying intellectual thing the world is giving us is setting people up for occult interest.
It's funny, people reject the coherent Christian theology for a bunch of fringy, incoherent occultist nonsense, but they actually will themselves to believe it. It's a true sort of fideism that we seem to be encountering.
Yeah, that's a good point, because and if you see and they're blind. It's so the occult rejects morality, and then the part of the occult, one of the things that came up is all the sexual deviancy, the mutilation, the excessive tattooing, excessive piercing, hair dyeing, strange clothing, all this stuff seems to be the way, as I've heard from several people in my research, the way the devil marks his own. There's this perversion that the occult embraces, and they seem to be blind to it. And that's the irrationalism of these so-called enlightened people. They don't see how it's destroying them and how it's guiding them to destroy others. Because what we see, the pagan morality we see just taking over the country and the whole world, is the same morality of the occult. So there's this kind of implicit occultism in a lot of people today, even if they don't explicitly practice the occult or identify with it.
Right, and with regard to the sexuality, I don't know if this came up in your research, but I feel like I saw this long ago, but didn't Aleister Crowley and some practitioners of magic say that when spells are cast at certain points of human sexuality, then they're actually more efficacious, more powerful in delivering the sought after results? I think that's something I saw when I was looking into a similar topic some time ago.
Yeah, that topic, I didn't get into that one. It makes perfect sense, though. Some of the topics when I was doing my research, like, I don't really want to go down that path, because there may have been something enlightening like that fits, but I just didn't want to have to read about it. But the reason why I think you're right, I think I heard someone talking about it in one of my interviews, is that abortion, and this is coming out, so I'm working on a second part. When I first finished my research, all the research was 800 pages. The Rise of the Occult, the book we're talking about now, let me get a picture here, is 350 reading pages. So this is half of my original research. So I'm working on the other half, trying to finish that for another book, hopefully coming out in October. But in that one, I have a whole chapter on abortion as an occult ritual, and how abortion is used in Satanism, witchcraft, and even those who are in the New Age tend to be of that mindset, tend to be of the liberal pro-abortion mindset. And abortion there was one disturbing case, a couple, disturbing cases, which I have in that book. And by the way, you can get my books, in case we didn't say it already, at my website, slayingdragonspress.com. So if you want to sign up there, you can hear about the new book coming out, because I don't know when. I'm so busy, it's hard to finish it up. But slayingdragonspress.com, and keep up with me there. But there's a group called if I can remember what it is, the Religious Coalition. Now I'm forgetting what it is, but you have to read my book, but you can find it online. But it's a group of liberal Christians, so-called Christians, but also includes some Jews, Muslims, and Hindus, who go around the country, and they're very public about this, blessing abortion centers. And some of their rituals include sprinkling some kind of water on the centers and burning sage. And the water could be some kind of moon water, which is a Wiccan thing, or witchcraft may do it as well, where they believe the moon has sanctified, by the spirit of whatever goddess, is sanctified the water. But they sprinkle whatever this water is all through these abortion centers, and they invoke God, whatever God this is. And some of these are, heretical Catholics. I think Catholics for Choice is part of this group. I think it's the Religious Center for Reproductive Choice, something like that. But they go around blessing abortion centers, saying this is a sacred work. And I pulled a lot of quotes from them from articles. But there's also the tendency among some witches to regard abortion as the transmutation of energy. So the killing of the child is a ceremonial religious ritual where the energy from that living being, and they acknowledge it, is then transmuted, is moved into your life in some way that you can manifest. And there's the word manifest again. You can control where that energy goes to get a new job, find a spouse, whatever, find love interest, new car, whatever it is. And that's wicked. That's deep wickedness. And then you see Satanism is very open that abortion is a religious ritual of their adherents. And this is the so-called, I think it's the Satanic Temple, they're so-called atheistic.
So it seems like occultists then are treating abortion as some kind of ritual that, beyond just the taking of human life, can actually produce certain effects.
Yeah, definitely. It's in these liberal Christian groups, as I mentioned, with the Religious Center for Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, or however it is. And then also certain witches will embrace it, certain Wiccans. It's not talked about too publicly, but you can see they're all about abortion. It's all part of that pagan morality that I talked about, which is everywhere in the culture, is in the occult. And we can see it. We can see it even more explicitly with certain forms of so-called atheistic and rational Satanism, the Satanic Temple being a big one, where they have made it very clear, very publicly, and very aggressively in the public forum, that abortion is a religious ritual of their adherents. And I've done so. They don't reveal publicly exactly what power they think they're tapping into. They like to hide their tie to the preternatural. But if you dig enough, you see that a lot of people in the Satanic Temple, which is so-called atheistic, are actually witches and Wiccans and practicing spells and other things that are occultic, clearly occultic, because they like to make Satan this shock and awe figure that just to provoke the religious right, and to claim to go after the whole emphasis on Christianity and the culture, which they think is bad, of course, because they're Satanists. But they claim not to be preternaturally religious, but they really are. And you can see this with the abortion ritual, especially.
Yeah, perhaps that's the most satanic of all, really doing his will while denying his existence, because his very existence would, of course, point people to God, because if there's an evil, then there's, of course, good. But this brings up a point in that the sexual revolution, then, we have to say, really paved the way for occult practices, given the premium that occult practices place on acts of sexuality and then abortion, right? It's almost like that whole Age of Aquarius thing. There's something to that. The sexual revolution has made possible our descent into occultism. Is that not right?
Yeah, because it, like divorce and like all these sexual identity disorder things we're dealing with, it's an attack on the human person. It's an attack on marriage. It's an attack on the foundations of what God has established for human civilization. So sexuality is at the core. That it creates new children. So it's a sacred act in the context of marriage, and the fruit of it is a whole new being who did not exist anywhere prior to the marital act. A new being is brought in who is destined to be a citizen of heaven. And this is where abortion is so evil and so satanic, because it goes after that child to destroy the child. But the sexual liberation, sexual revolution was a setup to completely corrupt the whole human race. And because it causes all these wounds. That's another big issue with my book, is that people go into the occult because they're wounded. So the sexual revolution led to abortion, led to promiscuity, rise in STDs, divorce, adultery, pornography, and all these things are just like the worst weapons against our souls when it comes to woundedness. And then we are all broken and we need healing, but no one's going after the church for healing, because the church is in a weakened state, and people have rejected the church and all the decline like we've talked about. So you have all these walking wounded people. I think it's an expression that's used, but they're going after the occult for healing, because the occult is off saying, hey, we can heal you, or hey, you don't need to worry about that baggage. There's no such thing as sin. There's no such thing as God, the preternatural. It's just us. Glorify yourself, love yourself, just give in, indulge. And that's what modern Satanism promotes, is just indulge. We're beasts, we're animals. It doesn't matter what you do. And that's a very dangerous message. And the youth are being targeted both by Satanism, by Wicca, by New Age, they are, and by the whole sexual deviant culture. They're going after the youth.
Yeah, that whole do what thou wilt is, of course, going to be very attractive to youth who are too often led by their passions and their desires rather than guided by their reason. Let me ask, though, you've interviewed a lot of priests, a lot of exorcists, and they've told their stories, and that, I think, can go a long way in reifying this in people's minds and making some of these phenomena actually more real. What do priests say about people that they've seen who've engaged in occultism and the effects that it's had on their lives, whether or not that's led to some kind of diabolical manifestation or possession?
One of the things that I thought was very helpful was that with all my research from the former occultists and the exorcists and the parish priests, they were all saying the same thing. They were all identifying the same problems, seeing the same effects. And one priest, he's a pastor and an exorcist, and he said that some easy things will lead people into the occult. You don't have to, in my book, I itemize things like even just teenage angst, anxiety, depression, the things that the teenagers are suffering from can push people to the occult. And little things like Ouija boards, they're seeing people dabbling in these things and having the negative diabolical ramifications. They've seen it in high school, or some of these exorcists I spoke to are also former or present high school chaplains. And they've seen the kids dabbling in the witchcraft and then breaking away from the church and getting into diabolical trouble and coming after the priest. Thankfully, he's there saying, Father, I need your help. A demon manifested against us the other day after we did this ritual. Why are you doing these rituals? But the occult and the culture, the promotion of witchcraft, of feminism, a strong of feminism is in witchcraft and is in the culture. And girls are going after. This one high school chaplain said, girls feel weak today. They feel powerless, and sometimes they feel vulnerable. They feel isolated. And what feminism destroys that protective instinct that men have towards women, because it tells men that women don't need your help anymore. So they need power and protection, and they're going after witchcraft to get it. And it's backfiring. They're seeing all kinds of problems, both not always diabolical issues right away, but it destroys the person, destroys their spirit, their future, their relationships, destroys their faith. It turns them into dark and depressed, and they've seen this. And that's back to the devil marks his own kind of thing. Once you start dabbling, it's not always diabolical. So not everybody gets possessed or home infestations or oppressed from going into the occult. But the devil, he ramps up his temptation. The devil's tempting us all the time. He ramps that up. It could be diabolical obsession for anybody who dabbles, because it does have an effect. It always has some kind of corrosive effect. And that addiction, they see that addiction. One priest said, when he talks to people who have gone into the occult, he says, okay, I need you to see me for like every day for a week, or like once a week for 9 weeks. I need you to give me some commitment so we can pray together and break this. And they won't do it. There's this addiction to the occult. There's this attachment that it's hard to let go of. So they've seen the same thing that the former occultists have actually gone through, where the demons keep haunting them, won't let them go, keep egging them on to go deeper and do darker things, greater sins, and things like that.
What are some of the manifestations of the diabolical that start occurring after people dabble in the occult? Like what, maybe somebody is watching this right now that has engaged in these practices, and it would help them to recognize maybe something that's going on in their own life. If you could give some examples or explain, what sort of things should people be on the lookout for if they have engaged in this sort of behavior?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So sleep paralysis. So some of these things can have natural causes. So we don't always, the advice of exorcists is to always assume a natural cause. But if you've been dabbling in the occult, well, you might want to assume a natural cause, but also question whether it might not be natural. So certain kinds of nightmares, a lot of times people are attacked at night. These former occultists are attacked at night by diabolical nightmares or oppressive experiences like sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis can have its own natural cause, but the feeling of an entity in the room or an entity in the house, that's a common thing. There's this presence. Like Gabriel, he felt this presence in his room the whole time, or his house, or wherever he was, for the whole number of years, 2 or 3 years that he was dabbling in the occult.
Well, let me probe that for a second. What does that really mean when you parse it out? You feel an entity in your house. I mean, can't there be the power of the mind, kind of the power of suggestion? Like I'm thinking maybe I'm joined by an entity, and if you think about something hard enough, then it kind of feels like that. The same way if you think about your shoulder enough, it'll start to itch or something to that effect.
Well, that's a good point there. So it could be both. It could be an actual entity, a dark, shadowy. Some of them had visions. So not visions, but they saw moving shadows. So that's beyond the sense that an entity is present. That would be what an exorcist would say is part of a home infestation. The manifestation of a demon can appear as a shadow that doesn't match what a shadow should be. There's no light source causing the shadow, or it's moving, a moving shadow, which of course is not natural. But it could be, like you're saying, the power of suggestion, because the devil works on fear, and the mind is very powerful. So he can cause you to be afraid that there's a demon in your room because you have dabbled and you know it's dangerous, and maybe there's not a demon present, but he can make you think there is, such that you are paralyzed by fear over it. And then if you experience a deliverance later because you return to Christ in the church, the fear can be taken away, and then therefore the shadow that you saw is now a normal shadow. So it could be both. It could be an actual demon is delivered from your life once you return to the church, return to Christ, and let him heal you and deliver you. Or it could be you're just simply delivered from the fear. So that's two. It's a very important point. It's not always present. But one, this is an interesting story for any witches who might listen. And I have this in an upcoming book on the occult that I talked about, the part 2 that I'm working on, that this witch allows spirits, entities to reside in her house, ghosts, whatever. They don't believe in demons, most of them. It's just good spirits and bad spirits, or curious spirits or friendly spirits. But she says she only allows certain spirits in that are friendly or have a mission or have a statement to give her, have a message. And she has these rules where they can't do other things. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Do you understand what you're saying? You can't make rules to bind these spirits. Like, you don't have power over them. But then as a result of welcoming and allowing these things in her home, through her dabbling, she told a story once, because I was watching these videos of these practicing witches just to get their insights, see what they were saying, of this spirit that was different, that was behaving differently, and was actually starting to bother her, starting to cause her to be worried, a little scared. It appeared in the kitchen one time, she said. It started banging on the walls, and then slowly was banging on the walls, moving down the kitchen to the dining room, whatever it was, over to the living room where she was sitting. She started to get really nervous because this is not the way spirits are supposed to act, and it was starting to sound aggressive. I'm like, lady, thinking to myself, like, you have a demon in the house. Like, this is one of the dangers of that's one of the dangers of practicing the occult. Eventually, you're going to cross a line, or you're going to stay long enough that a demon's going to start to make himself known and attack.
And that was the demon that caused her to lose the 2016 election, of course.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't name who this person was.
Sure, no. So, I mean, that's pretty powerful. I don't understand how practitioners are dabbling in these arts and they're inviting things into their lives, and they're not seeing that these are sinister and malevolent energies and spirits, because of course they're not really energies, you know, they are personal. But I don't understand how people invite this into their lives and are seeing the ramifications of their occultism, and at the same time they're fine with that, and they're, as you said, addicted to it, and they go on as if everything is hunky-dory and normal.
And that's the key. It's they've tasted power and they're addicted to it. And every time I have conversations with people, well, a lot of times I have conversations about this in podcasts, people are like, that sounds a lot like drug addiction. So they know it's destroying them. They know it's dangerous. They know they could die from it, but it's so exciting, so exhilarating, and so like they're tasting this power that they just can't stop until it eventually kills them or possesses them. But one thing is, so they're blind. There's this blindness that the devil brings. Of course, we know that from temptation. Whenever we sin, we have a mental, intellectual blindness. But that's one of the things that drives people out of the occult too, is eventually a demon will cross a line or ramp it up so much that it frightens them, and then they realize, oh, wow, what am I doing? I've got to get out of the occult before it kills me. And I think it was Gabriel in my research, he said he started to experience some of these negative things like sleep paralysis, nighttime attacks, claw marks. Sometimes they'll physically assaulted by whatever this entity is. And physically hurt. And he was looking up online, and all these other people on YouTube, I think it was, all these other people from the New Age were talking about how they were getting attacked by spirits, attacked at night, and all these other kinds of attacks. It was a very common occurrence. And he started to realize, like, wow, what am I into? I really got to get out. And that's when the demon kind of grabbed onto him and made it very difficult to quit.
Sure. Charles, alas, we're out of time. You know, clock always flies by when we do these podcasts together, because obviously you're an interesting guy, and the subject that you've chosen to write on is also fascinating and very timely. Do you have anything that you'd like to leave our audience to ruminate on? Any last warnings or exhortations about this subject matter that you think are especially timely and appropriate?
Yeah, I would say two things. I guess a warning and a hope. Like, I do see this as a new religious movement that we have to name as such and be aware of, because it's infiltrating everything. It's in politics, entertainment, culture, books, programming, schools. You got to be careful what friends your kids have as a result, but you don't want to be paranoid too. So we need to be on alert that this is out there. And as a result, we need to hunker down, learn the faith, practice the faith, embrace the sacraments and sacramentals devoutly, and pray well, and entrust this whole world, everything that's happening, to our Lord, because he's warned us already that at the end times, whether we're there or not, it's going to get really bad. And this could be one of the forms or the form that the really bad takes before the Antichrist, before the end. So someone's going to live during that generation where it's really bad. And it could be us, it might not be us, but entrust it to him. And here's the hope, like, our Lord is rescuing people miraculously from the occult. It's happening, but also people are dying in the occult and are being destroyed, irreparably harmed by the occult. So it's a serious thing, but our Lord is still very active. So we have to cooperate. And I have in chapter 19 how Catholics can help. I have a quote from Pope Pius XII, which I think everybody should read. I cut it up in the beginning and the end of chapter 19. But basically, he's saying from Mystici Corporis Christi, which is on the mystical body of Christ, Pope Pius XII, that our Lord depends on us as members of his church to pray, do good works, and fast, those things and similar, to call down certain graces that he's holding. He wants to dispense to the world, but he's waiting for us to cooperate with him. He won't dispense it without our help. And Pope Pius says that the salvation of many people is dependent on our cooperation. So if you see the devastation that's happening with the occult, we need to rise up with our faith. We need to make the faith more public, make the faith more intense, and return to the traditional practice of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving all year, not just during Lent, because our Lord will flood the earth with his grace and save us from going into the occult or being attacked by it or lured by it or tempted by it, and also pull people out of it. So I would I guess those would be my warning and hope and admonition.
Very empowering message. Thank you for that. Guys, the book is Slaying Dragons 2. You can get it at slayingdragonspress.com. Charles is an excellent writer, and I can't commend his work enough. Please go get a copy, and God willing, avoid the occult. Guys, this has been another Mic'd Up. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Signing off, I'm David Gordon.